The forge burned hotter than 3 dying suns, and I was absolutely certain this human was going to kill herself. My name is Krell, junior metallurgist from the Von Thor Collective, and I had traveled 47 light-years to learn the secret of human steel. What I got instead was a sweaty woman with hair tied back in a rag, who kept muttering obscenities at a lump of glowing metal like it had personally insulted her ancestors. "Are you going to stand there gawking, or are you going to pump that bellows?" she barked, without looking up. Her name was Margot de Vries, master bladesmith, and apparently my new teacher. The guild had assured me this placement would reveal the mysterious techniques that made human weapons the most sought-after items in 17 sectors. Instead, I was being asked to perform manual labor. "I thought I was here to observe advanced forging protocols," I said, trying to maintain diplomatic composure. "You thought wrong." She slammed her hammer down, and sparks exploded across the workshop. "Observation gets you theory. Theory gets you garbage blades that shatter on the first swing. Now pump." I grabbed the bellows handle with my lower manipulators, deeply regretting my career choices. The other apprentices had gotten better assignments. My clutchmate Ven was studying quantum mechanics with the Mars Institute. Threx was learning agricultural innovations on the colony worlds. And here I was, sweating through my thermal regulation membranes in a converted warehouse that smelled like burning coal and disappointment. Margot pulled the steel from the flames, and even I could tell something was wrong. The color was uneven, the glow patchy. She stared at it for exactly 3 seconds, then dunked it in the water trough with a hiss that made my ear holes ache. "Garbage," she announced. "Absolute garbage. You know why? Improper carbon saturation during the heating phase? Because I rushed it." She wiped her forehead, leaving a black streak across her face. "Been doing this for 22 years, and I still rush when I'm showing off for visitors. You want to know the secret of human steel?" I leaned forward, finally ready for the revelation that would justify this insanity. Patience. I waited for her to continue. She didn't. "That's it? That's everything." She pulled out a new steel blank, this one longer and slightly curved. "This one's for a client on Kepler Station. Paid 18 months in advance. You know what he's paying for? Not the metal, not my reputation. He's paying for the 400 hours I'm going to spend getting this right. 400 hours for one blade? Give or take." She positioned the steel in the coals with movements so precise they might have been choreographed. "Heat it too fast. The grain structure goes wrong. Fold it wrong? You get weak lines. Quench it wrong. It shatters. Rush any single step, and you've got an expensive piece of trash." Over the next 6 hours, I learned that humans were either the most stubborn species in the galaxy or completely insane. Possibly both. Margot heated the steel 17 times. Between each heating, she hammered it flat, folded it over itself, and hammered it again. The workshop rang like a percussion concert performed by someone who hated music. My auditory sensors would be processing that ringing for days. "Count the folds," she said during the 8th repetition. "Why does the number matter?" "Because 16 folds gives you 65,000 layers, 32 folds gives you 4 billion, and if you lose count, you start over." "That seems inefficient." She laughed, which mostly sounded like coughing. "Efficiency is what you do when you want something cheap." "I don't make cheap," a chime echoed from somewhere in the back of the workshop. Margot straightened, rolled her shoulders with several disturbing cracks, and set down her hammer. "Break time. You hungry?" I wasn't sure my species and hers had compatible nutritional requirements, but I followed her to a small room that served as both office and kitchen. She pulled out containers of food that smelled aggressively spiced and offered me one. "It's vegetable curry. Probably won't kill you." I accepted it because refusing seemed ruder than potential poisoning. "So," she said between bites that she barely chewed, "tell me what you actually want to learn here." "The Guild wants to understand human manufacturing processes. Your weapons command premium prices across multiple systems. There must be some technological advantage we haven't identified. Technological advantage? She snorted. You know what my most advanced tool is? A hammer. Same design humans have used for 8,000 years. Nothing fancy. Just steel hitting steel. But the quality standards you achieve suggest advanced molecular manipulation techniques. No manipulation. Just repetition. She pointed at her hands, which were covered in calluses thick enough to qualify as armor plating. You want to know what makes human steel different? Every other species in the galaxy found a shortcut. Plasma forging, molecular printers, nano-assembly, all faster, all more consistent, and all wrong. How can efficiency be wrong? Because steel remembers. She set down her food, suddenly intense. Every time you heat it and hammer it, you're telling the molecules who they're going to be. Rush that conversation, and you get steel that doesn't know itself. It cracks under pressure, shatters at the wrong moment. But take your time, fold it enough, work it until your arms feel like they're going to fall off, and you get steel that knows exactly what it is. I processed this for several moments. That sounds like mysticism. Sounds like it. Isn't. She pulled out a datapad and showed me molecular scans. Look at the grain structure of machine-forged steel. See those stress points? Those microfractures? Now look at this. The hand-forged sample was different. The molecular bonds, aligned in patterns that seemed almost organic, flowing, and interlocking like the structure of bone or shell. How is this possible with primitive techniques? Because I pay attention? She zoomed in on a section. When you fold steel by hand, you feel the resistance. You hear how the hammer rings. If something's wrong, you know it before any scanner would catch it. Machines can't do that. They follow programs. They don't listen. The forge bell chimed again, marking the end of break time that had felt like 17 seconds. Back at the workshop, Margot returned to her endless cycle of heating and hammering. I watched the steel transform from a crude blank into something that almost resembled a blade. The curve became more pronounced. The surface developed a subtle texture that caught the light in strange ways. The client wants a traditional design, she explained during the 23rd heating, called a katana in Old Earth Japanese. It's technically obsolete for actual combat, but people like the aesthetic. Plus, it makes a decent wall decoration for executives who want to feel dangerous. You're spending 400 hours on decoration? I'm spending 400 hours on perfection. What the client does with it is their business. She studied the blade's curve with an intensity that suggested she could see things invisible to my sensors. Besides, even if it never cuts anything, it should be capable of cutting anything. That's integrity. A concept I was beginning to understand, though it still seemed monumentally inefficient. 3 more hours of heating and hammering. My manipulators ached from working the bellows. My audio sensors had given up trying to filter out the constant ringing of hammer on steel. And Margot just kept going, her movements never varying, her focus absolute. "Teacher," I finally asked, "do you ever get bored?" "Every single day." She wiped her forehead again, redistributing the soot. "Boredom is part of the process. You think I enjoy the 1,000th hammer strike as much as the first? But that's when most people fail. They get bored. They start thinking about dinner, or their bills, or what they're doing this weekend. Their focus slips. And the blade knows. The blade isn't sentient. The blade remembers everything you put into it. Every distracted hammer strike. Every time you checked your messages instead of watching the temperature. It all shows up in the final product. She turned the steel, examining it from multiple angles. You want to know why human weapons are valuable? Because you can look at one and know exactly how much someone cared. You can't fake that. Not with any technology in the galaxy. We worked until the station's artificial sunset started painting the sky outside orange and purple. Margot finally set down her hammer and stretched, joints popping in ways that sounded medically concerning. "That's day 1, she announced. "We'll do the differential hardening tomorrow." Day 1? But we barely began the actual blade construction. Exactly. She started banking the forge fire, movements practiced and efficient. "You've got, what, a 6-month apprenticeship? Standard term is 4 months. Hope you weren't planning on finishing early." She grinned, and it wasn't particularly comforting. "That blade we started today? It'll be done about 3 weeks before you leave. If everything goes right, which it won't, because I'll probably screw up the tempering at least once. You've been doing this for 22 years. How can you still make mistakes? Because every piece of steel is different. Every fire burns differently. Every day, my arms are a little stronger or a little weaker. You can control the variables, but you can't eliminate them. So you build in contingencies. You expect failure. And when it happens, you start over." She locked up the workshop with security measures that seemed excessive for a place that made swords. Then again, given what I'd learned about human manufacturing, maybe they were worried about industrial espionage. "See you at dawn," she said. And I mean actual dawn, not whatever time feels convenient. The forge waits for no one. I returned to my assigned quarters in the apprentice housing complex, exhausted in ways I hadn't known were possible. My entire body ached. My sensory array was overstimulated, and I had learned almost nothing that could be quantified in a report to the guild. My communicator chimed. "Ven, checking in from Mars. How's your placement going?" they asked, their 3 eye stalks bright with curiosity. "I spent 8 hours watching someone hit metal with a hammer." "That's it? That's it? Did you at least learn the secret technique?" I thought about Margot's words, about the endless folding and heating and hammering, about patience and attention, and the willingness to start over when things went wrong. "Yes," I said slowly, "but I don't think I can explain it." "That doesn't sound like you, Krell. You love explaining things." "I know." I flexed my aching manipulators. "Check back with me in 4 months. Maybe I'll understand it by then." We ended the call, and I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying the rhythm of hammer on steel, the precise way Margot positioned each piece before striking, the focus in her eyes as she studied temperatures and grain patterns invisible to advanced sensors. Dawn came too early. I arrived at the workshop to find Margot already there, forge burning, a different blade laid out on the workbench. This one looked nearly complete, its curve elegant, its surface polished to a mirror finish. "This was my first sword," she said, handling it with something close to reverence. "Made it during my apprenticeship, 24 years ago. Took me 6 months because I screwed up constantly, but I kept going." She held it up to the light, and I could see faint lines in the steel where the folds had created patterns. It's not my best work. Probably not even in my top 50. But every time I look at it, I remember what it felt like to finally get something right after months of failure. That feeling is why I keep doing this. She set it back on the workbench with care. "Your turn." "My turn for what?" She handed me a hammer and a piece of steel stock. "You're going to make a knife. Nothing fancy. Just a simple blade about this long." She indicated a length with her hands. "It'll probably take you 6 weeks if you don't quit. And it'll definitely be terrible. Then why bother? Because terrible is how you start. And starting is the only way to get better. Now, watch this temperature. When it hits orange-yellow, pull it out and bring it to the anvil. I'll guide your first strikes." The steel heated slowly, far slower than I expected. I wanted to increase the temperature, speed the process, but Margot's hand stopped me. "Patience," she reminded me. Right. Patience. The secret of human steel wasn't in the metal or the technique. It was in the willingness to stand in front of a burning forge, day after day, doing the same repetitive tasks until your body screamed for rest. It was in the acceptance that perfection required time measured in hundreds of hours, not minutes or seconds. It was in the understanding that some things simply couldn't be rushed, no matter how advanced your technology became. The steel reached temperature. I pulled it from the forge with tongs that felt awkward in my manipulators. To the anvil. Quick now, but not too quick. I positioned the steel. Margot guided my hammer hand. Strike, where the metal needs to move. Not where you think looks right. Feel it. The hammer fell. Steel rang. Sparks flew. And I began, very slowly, to understand. Week 2 of my apprenticeship, and I had destroyed 17 knife blanks. Margot seemed pleased about this. You're learning faster than I expected, she said, examining my latest failure. The blade had warped during quenching, curving like a banana instead of staying straight. This one almost made it. Almost doesn't seem sufficient. Almost is how progress looks. She tossed the ruined blade into a scrap bin that was depressingly full of my previous load. Attempts. You know what your problem is? I had several theories, but she continued before I could answer. You think too much. Your brain is running calculations while your hands are trying to work. Steel doesn't care about math. It cares about pressure and temperature and timing. Those are all mathematical concepts. Sure, if you want to be boring about it. She pulled out a fresh blank for me. Try this. Close your secondary eyes, the ones you use for analysis. That seems counterproductive. Humor me. I complied, reducing my visual input by 40%. The workshop immediately became less detailed, edges softer, colors less precise. Now heat your steel. But don't watch the temperature gauge. Watch the color. The blank went into the forge. Without my analytical vision, I couldn't see the thermal gradients or molecular activity. Just metal, slowly shifting from gray to red to orange. See how the color moves? It doesn't spread evenly. There's a pattern to it. She was right. The heat crept along the steel like liquid, pooling in thicker sections, racing through thinner areas. I had never noticed this before because I had been too focused on numerical readouts. When it hits sunrise orange, pull it. Sunrise orange. A completely subjective description that somehow made perfect sense. I pulled the steel and brought it to the anvil. Don't aim. Just let the hammer fall where it needs to. This contradicted everything I knew about precision work, but I tried anyway. The hammer dropped, and the impact felt different. Not better, exactly. Just different. More connected. Again, I struck repeatedly, letting instinct guide placement instead of calculation. The steel flattened and began taking shape. Not the shape I had planned, but a shape that felt right somehow. Good, Margot said quietly. Now you're starting to listen. By week 4, my knife blade was recognizable as an actual blade, crooked, uneven, and aesthetically offensive, but functionally blade-shaped. The other apprentices had started visiting my station during their breaks. Most were human, learning traditional crafts that their own species had largely abandoned in favor of automation. There was Marcus, a tall man studying woodworking, Yuki, who was learning glass blowing, and Pavel, whose pottery wheel seemed to be engaged in a personal war against him. At least your medium stays solid, Pavel complained, watching me grind bevels into my knife. Clay has opinions about everything. Steel has opinions too, I assured him. It just expresses them through cracking and warping. Marcus laughed, running his hand along a piece of wood he had been planing for 3 days. My teacher says wood remembers being a tree. Every knot, every grain pattern is the tree telling you where it wanted to grow. You either work with that story or you fight it. Sounds familiar, I muttered. Yuki nodded enthusiastically. Glass is like frozen liquid. If you try to force it into shapes it doesn't want, it shatters. But if you suggest directions gently enough, it flows beautifully. We had somehow formed a support group for beings tortured by supposedly primitive materials. Why do you think humans still do this? Pavel asked. They have molecular printers that could make perfect versions of everything we're struggling with. I asked Margot that, I admitted. She said something about soul, which I initially dismissed as mysticism. But now, I think she meant something else. What? Proof of effort! I held up my pathetic knife blank. Anyone can press a button and get a perfect knife. But this thing, terrible as it is, proves I spent 4 weeks learning how steel moves. That knowledge exists in my hands now. In my instincts, no one can take that away or replicate it with a machine. Marcus looked at his woodpiece thoughtfully. My teacher told me that humans went through a phase where they tried to optimize everything, make it faster, cheaper, more efficient. And they did. But something got lost. The connection between maker and object. So this is rebellion? Yuki asked. This is remembering, Marcus corrected. Remembering that some things have value beyond efficiency. Margot appeared behind us like she had been summoned by excessive philosophy. Break time is over. Back to suffering. We scattered to our stations. I returned to my grinding, trying to even out bevels that seemed determined to stay asymmetrical. Krell! Margot called. Come look at this! She had returned to her katana project, which was now in the polishing phase. The blade gleamed under the workshop lights, its curve perfect, its surface showing the subtle wave pattern of folded steel. See this line? She indicated a faint boundary running along the blade's length. This is the Haman. It forms where hard steel meets soft steel during differential hardening. Every swordsmith's Haman is unique, like a signature. How is it created? Carefully. She pulled out clay and a brush. You coat the spine in thick clay to insulate it during quenching. The edge gets thin clay or no clay. When you quench, the edge hardens fast, while the spine stays soft. Hard edge for cutting, soft spine for flexibility. And if you make a mistake, the blade cracks and you start over. She began applying clay with brush strokes that looked almost artistic. I've cracked more blades than you've probably seen in your life. Still happens sometimes. But that's the contract you make with steel. You give it your best effort, and sometimes it says no anyway. That seems cruel. That's honest. She finished the clay application and set it aside to dry. Oh, machines don't fail randomly. If a molecular printer screws up, it's because of a programming error or mechanical defect. Something you can fix and prevent from happening again. But hand forging? Sometimes you do everything right, and the steel still cracks. Maybe there was an impurity you couldn't see. Maybe the moon was in the wrong phase. Who knows? How do you cope with that uncertainty? By accepting it. She cleaned her brushes with methodical care. Perfection isn't about never failing. It's about failing and trying again, and again, until eventually things work. She picked up my knife blank and examined it critically. This is ready for heat treating. We'll do it tomorrow. Probably won't crack, but it might. Either way, you'll learn something. That night, I couldn't sleep again, but for different reasons. Tomorrow, my blade would either survive or shatter. 4 weeks of work validated or destroyed in seconds. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. It was just a learning exercise. The outcome was irrelevant compared to the process. I failed to convince myself of anything. Dawn arrived with my anxiety intact. Margot was already preparing the forge, her movements brisk and efficient. Ready to see if your baby survives? I would prefer not to anthropomorphize my blade. Too late. You've been calling it my blade for 3 days now. That's attachment. She grinned. Don't worry. First blade always cracks. It's tradition. That doesn't comfort me. Wasn't meant to. She talked me through the heating process. Bring it up to critical temperature slowly. Watch for the color. Not the gauge, the actual color. When it hits that specific shade of orange that exists between sunset and fire, pull it immediately. I watched my blade heat, every second, feeling like an hour. The color shifted gradually, beautifully, terrifyingly. "Now," Margot said. I pulled the blade and plunged it into oil. The quench was violent, flames erupting from the surface, smoke filling my sensory passages. The blade hissed and steamed like a living thing in agony. Then, silence. "Pull it out," slowly. I lifted the blade from the oil, still intact, no visible cracks. The steel had darkened, its surface now showing subtle textures I hadn't noticed before. "Well done," Margot said simply. "It survived. Now we temper it to reduce brittleness, and then you can start actually sharpening it." Relief flooded through my system in ways I didn't know were possible. My terrible, crooked, ugly knife had survived its trial by fire. "Why am I so emotionally invested in this?" I asked. "Because you made it," Margot patted my shoulder manipulator. "Welcome to craftsmanship. It's addictive." The remaining weeks blurred together in a haze of grinding, polishing, and handle construction. Margot insisted I carve the handle myself from wood Marcus had given me, which meant learning an entirely new set of frustrating skills. "Everything connects," Marcus explained while teaching me basic carving. "The blade wants a handle that balances it. The wood wants to be shaped in ways that follow its grain. Your hands want movements that don't cause cramping. Find where all those wants overlap." My handle ended up lumpy and irregular, but it fit my grip perfectly. Margot showed me how to secure it with pins and epoxy, creating a permanent bond between steel and wood. "Last step," she said, handing me increasingly fine polishing compounds. "Make it shine." I polished for 2 days straight, working through grits that went from rough to impossibly fine. The blade slowly transformed from dull gray to bright silver, its scratches diminishing until the surface became almost mirror-like. Finally, Margot took it from me and ran her thumb along the edge I had spent hours sharpening. "Not bad. Won't win any beauty contests, but it'll cut." She handed it back. "Congratulations. You're now a bladesmith." I made one knife. Everyone starts with one knife. Then they make another. And another. Until eventually, they make something amazing. She pulled out a wooden display box lined with fabric. "This is yours. For your first blade." I placed my ugly, crooked, beautiful knife in the box. It looked small and insignificant, but it represented 4 months of frustration and learning and tiny victories. "Thank you, teacher." "Don't thank me yet. We still need to test it." She led me outside, where a testing area had been set up with various materials: rope, wood, bamboo, and some synthetic compounds I didn't recognize. "Cut." I drew my blade and approached the rope. The edge bit through smoothly, fibers parting with minimal resistance. The wood took more effort, but still cut cleanly. By the time I finished testing, my blade had proven itself functional, if not elegant. "You understand now?" Margot asked. "Understand what?" "Why we do it this way. Why patience matters. Why sweat matters." I looked at my blade, at the faint irregularities in its surface, at the handle carved specifically for my grip. No machine could have made this knife, because no machine would have made these particular mistakes and adjustments. This blade existed because I had spent 4 months arguing with steel until we reached an agreement. "Yes," I said. "I understand." My final week at the forge, Margot finished her katana. The polishing revealed patterns in the steel that looked almost like flowing water, the Haman line crisp and perfect along the edge. 412 hours, she announced, close enough to my estimate. "It's beautiful. It's adequate." But she smiled while saying it. "The client will be pleased. And more importantly, I'm pleased. That's what matters." She began wrapping the handle in traditional cord, her fingers moving in complex patterns I couldn't follow. The final product looked like something from a museum, ancient and modern simultaneously. "Will you ever make anything with modern techniques?" I asked. "Why would I?" She tested the handle wrap's tension. Machines are good at making things that work. I'm good at making things that matter. Different markets. On my last day, the apprentices gathered for a small celebration. We displayed our finished works, a collection of objects ranging from terrible to merely bad. My knife sat next to Pavel's extremely lopsided bowl, and Yuki's glass vase that leaned at a concerning angle. To imperfection, Marcus toasted with water because the workshop had strict rules about alcohol near forges. To patience, Yuki added. To not giving up, even when everything seems terrible, Pavel said with feeling. I raised my cup. To human stubbornness. They laughed, and we drank. Margot approached me later while I was packing my tools. The guild wants a report, right? What are you going to tell them? I considered this carefully. That human manufacturing maintains value because it carries proof of human effort. That your weapons are expensive because they represent time that cannot be faked or rushed. That patience and sweat are resources more valuable than efficiency in certain markets. Boring, but accurate. She pulled out a wrapped package. This is for you. Inside was a small forging hammer, its handle worn smooth from use. This was my first hammer. My teacher gave it to me when I finished my apprenticeship. Now I'm giving it to you. I can't accept this. Too late. It's tradition. You're stuck with it. She pressed it into my manipulators. Come back sometime. Show me your second blade. Let's see if you learned anything. I gripped the hammer, feeling the weight of expectation and tradition it carried. I will, teacher. Thank you. The transport back to Vanthor took 3 weeks. I spent most of that time writing my report, trying to quantify concepts that resisted quantification. How do you measure the value of attention? How do you cost analyze stubbornness? Eventually, I stopped trying to make it fit standard formats. Instead, I wrote what I had learned. That humans had discovered something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. That speed and efficiency had their place. But so did slowness and effort. That some things were worth doing the hard way precisely because they were hard. The guild reviewed my report with confusion. This doesn't provide actionable intelligence, my supervisor complained. Because the intelligence isn't actionable in the way you want, I replied. You can't replicate human craftsmanship with better tools or faster processes. It exists because of the tools and processes, not despite them. So your recommendation is that we do nothing? My recommendation is that we acknowledge human manufacturing occupies a niche we cannot and should not compete with. Their work commands premium prices because it offers something ours doesn't. Authenticity. Story. Proof of human effort. The supervisor looked unsatisfied but filed the report anyway. I returned to my quarters and unpacked my knife. In 4 months, I had learned to forge steel, carve wood, and accept imperfection. I had discovered that patience wasn't passive waiting, but active attention. That sweat wasn't just biological cooling, but physical proof of effort invested. And I had learned that sometimes the most advanced technology in the galaxy was a hammer, and the willingness to use it 400 times in pursuit of something that mattered. My communicator chimed. Then, checking in. How was your apprenticeship? I looked at my crooked knife and smiled. Transformative, frustrating, worth every moment. Did you learn the secret? Yes, the secret is there is no secret, just work, endless, patient, stubborn work. I'm going back next year to make another blade. Ben's eye stalks waved in confusion. Why would you voluntarily repeat something terrible? I picked up Margot's hammer, feeling its weight, its history, its expectation. Because terrible is just the beginning, and I want to see what comes after that. Outside my window, the stars glittered in familiar patterns. Somewhere out there, Margot was, starting another blade. Marcus was shaping another piece of wood. Yuki was heating another gather of glass. And Pavel was probably swearing at his pottery wheel. All of them engaged in the ancient, inefficient, absolutely essential work of making things that mattered. I set up a small forge in my quarters, ordered steel stock, and began planning my second blade. This one would be better. Not perfect, probably not even good, but better. Because that was the real secret humans had whispered to me across 4 months of patience and sweat. Perfection wasn't the goal. Progress was. And progress, however slow, was always worth the effort.